On the morning of August 12th, 1983, one of the most famous alien encounters in the town of Aldershot, England would occur. This older case continues to be extremely controversial among ufologists and locals to the area. That said, this close encounter of the third kind is quite interesting and one that deserves examination. In this episode, we will explore the Alfred Burtoo Alien Encounter. Sometime after midnight on August 12, 1983, 77-year-old Alfred Burtoo grabbed his fishing gear and with his dog Tiny began heading down to the desolate Basingstoke Canal for some night fishing. After checking out a few spots, Alfred finally picked his fishing spot around 1 a.m. Then around 15 minutes later, Alfred would spot a bright light heading toward him. It settled down around 300 feet away, right next to the path next to the canal. After seeing the light, Alfred didn't think too much of it, as there was a military base just nearby. He poured himself a cup of tea and kept fishing, but soon things would get strange. First, Tiny began barking furiously in the direction of the light. Alfred, with eyes on the water, commanded his dog to stop, but Tiny wouldn't. Alfred then glanced over and saw two dark humanoid figures coming in his direction. He couldn't make out specifics on the beings at first, but Alfred wasn't too worried. This is because Alfred had a military background, and he initially believed the figures might just be coming to check on him. As Alfred smoked his cigarette, he began to make out more details on the figures. They kept approaching, and although he wasn't scared, he surely was becoming curious. The beings got closer and closer. Then, he would spot more details. They were around 4.5 feet tall, wearing green coveralls that covered their whole body. He would later recall there were no buttons or zippers, and it was as if the suit was molded to their bodies. Alfred couldn't see their faces, as the beings wore a green helmet with a black visor. The entities would get around 5 feet away and stop. Both stared at Alfred for several moments, while Tiny continued barking. Then they gestured to him to come along. Alfred would begin following them toward the light. One being walked in front, while another one walked behind him. At this time, Alfred was more curious than scared. He would later recall that some of this had to do with his military training, and some of it had to do with his age and failing health. As he approached the ship, which rested in the air, Alfred would climb the stairs along with the beings. As he entered the room, he had to duck down slightly as to not hit his head. The room was all black and had 8 sides and was warmer than the outside. It had a foul smell, which Alfred compared to rotting meat. As he looked around, he would spot no bolts or screws in the walls, and it appeared to be smooth all over. During this time, Alfred could see the beings out of the corner of his eye. Then he heard some sort of noise, and the beings disappeared behind the wall. It's not clear if they just went through it, or a silent door just slid open, but now Alfred was standing in the room, all by himself. After a few minutes, in the middle of the room, a large shaft rose up from the bottom. Right next to it were 2 more beings, almost identical in appearance to the first 2. The shaft was large, around 4 feet in circumference. Then Alfred would be instructed to come over and stand under the light. He couldn't see any light, though, in the room. He stepped over to the right, and an amber light was right on him. It was glowing from ceiling to floor. He stepped into the light with no hesitation. While the light was shining on him, one of the beings would ask his age. Alfred responded that he would be 78 at his next birthday. He was instructed to turn around, and once he did, the being said, "You can go. You are too old and infirm for our purposes." Somewhat surprised, he left the craft and went back to his fishing spot. There he would grab a sip of tea and notice about an hour had passed. Alfred alleged to be unfazed by the experience and got back to fishing. As he was doing this, he would hear a noise from the craft and also see a bright white light. The craft then shot off into the night sky. Shockingly, Alfred would continue to fish all night and then around 10 a.m., several policemen would walk by. He would mention the craft and his experience, and astonishingly, one of the policemen didn't seem surprised and even mentioned it was probably here to check out the military base. As the weeks progressed, Alfred found himself thinking more and more about that night and his experience. He wasn't sure of many things, but he did want answers. In October of that year, he decided to reach out to the local newspaper, the Aldershot News, in hope that someone else had seen the craft that night, or perhaps had had a similar experience. Alfred wouldn't find any other witnesses, but the event would draw the attention of several ufologists, such as Timothy Good, who would investigate the case. Good believed Alfred and thought he was telling the truth, although he wished that he would have tried to ask more questions to the beings. What can we make of this incredible story by Alfred Burtoo? Like many cases, there appears to be some things that make it seem genuine, while other aspects that make it seem fabricated. Many skeptics have questioned the story at hand. Some asked how Burtoo was able to remain so calm through the event. Also, what about his dog? It seemed to stay behind at the fishing spot, but some think the dog would have insisted on coming along. In addition to this, it's never good from a credibility perspective to wait months to report a story like this. This is somewhat of an unfair criticism, as it's understandable how people just want to move on with their lives. Still, Alfred was 77 and didn't seem to be scared of much. Several things in the story also align with other UFO reports. For one, the beings were near a military base. It's well documented, even in present day, that UFOs seem to get spotted near military installations. There's various theories on this, which include scary ones, like they are gathering intelligence data and assessing our defenses, and other ones suggesting they are just curious about our capabilities. One interesting case that has incredible similarities is the 1971 Finland forestry alien encounter, which we covered on this channel not too long ago. In that case, the being is described almost exactly the same way. The being in that case had green coveralls with a green helmet and a black visor. The only difference between these two cases, in terms of the beings, is that in the Finland case, the beings were described as 2 feet tall, while Alfred said they were around 4 feet. The Finland case happened 7 years before Alfred's encounter. Alfred alleged in the encounter the beings didn't want him because of his declining health. This is something we've seen in other cases as well, and not too surprising. Alfred had mixed emotions on this decision by the beings, though, as a part of him wanted to travel through the universe and get to do things few have done. With his declining health, Alfred would die several years after the encounter. There's rumors that a strong military presence now controls the area where the event occurred. It's reported to be tough to get into and out of, and some speculate the military has recovered crafts or possibly been in contact with the beings. Of course, none of this is known for sure. While we might never get the answers we want in the Alfred Burtoo incident, it surely is an interesting case to examine.